Lord of the Mysteries audiobook by Kevin 401 Divine Epiphany Backlund, in a basement that resembled a temple. Mr. A, dressed in a hooded black robe, motionlessly quietly knelt in front of a figurine of the hanged giant for an extended period of time. Suddenly, he pricked up his ears as if he was listening to something. After a short pause, Mr. A's hands jerked up, and he snapped his right index finger with his left palm. He stuffed the bloody finger into his mouth and munched on it like he was eating snacks, making crunching sounds. Gulp! Mr. A's throat wiggled, and he swallowed his gnawed fingers into his stomach. His body suddenly trembled, as if he was being grabbed and shaken by an invisible figure. In this state, Mr. A stretched out his right hand and used the blood from his wound to write words on the ground. Those words were written in neither Jotun or Dragonese, which could stir the powers of nature, nor was it in Hermes, which was used for sacrificial rituals. Instead, they were written in the most ordinary and commonplace language, Loan. The scarlet color quickly gathered together and the words pieced together into a few sentences. Found. The fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck, adorers and devotees in Backlund. After the end of the divine epiphany, Mr. A stopped trembling, and a new finger grew out of his squirming wound. He lowered his head and carefully read the words he had just written, the corners of his mouth curled up in the shadows. By your divine revelation, Mr. A humbly prostrated as though he had found the meaning of his existence once again. City of Silver, at the top of the spire. Lovia walked to the window and looked down at the candlelight in the darkness, her expression softening. After an unknown period of time, she heard a knock at the door. Your Excellency. Lovia turned around with alacrity and greeted the visitor with a smile. The door opened backward automatically. The person standing outside was none other than demon hunter Colin Iliad. He was draped with a brown coat and a leather belt with secret compartments around his waist. Lovia, the abnormality of the exploratory team has been verified, Colin described plainly. As captain, regardless of your condition, you have to stay in the dungeon for 3 days and undergo the Glory Crown's cleansing. You should know that this is the rule. Lovia didn't show the slightest hint of anger as she calmly smiled. I know, I've already made preparations to stay in the dungeon for a long time. When it's over, I can accept any arrangements even if you guys still don't trust me. As she spoke, she had walked to the door and went past demon hunter Colin while facing him. Colin turned silently and followed her down the winding steps. Halfway there, they heard heart-wrenching cries and shouts. Is it starting again? Lovia asked with a slightly confused expression. Colin nodded and replied in a low voice, Yes, this is a destiny that we can't escape from, at this moment, in a large hall in the middle levels of the spire. The members of the exploratory team and the few residents of the City of Silver who had been corrupted were pressed down to the ground by seemingly corporeal holy lusters. They were unable to move, as though they were carrying a huge mountain on their backs. A couple in their 40s with dark skin held a sword with complicated patterns as they walked up to a young man in his early 20s. The young man's body had already turned into a meat slush, but his head was still intact. Only a long, thin, blood-red tendril grew out of it. Seeing the couple approaching, he shouted in horror, Dad, Mom, what are you doing? Didn't we agree to eat grilled iron scorpions together tonight? Dad, Mom, I caught a lot of iron scorpions for you. The couple couldn't bear it any longer and turned their heads to the side, but they raised the sword in their hands high into the air after 2 stabbing sounds rang out. The young man stopped his wailing. He twitched first, then he completely lost all signs of life. Elsewhere, a young girl who was around 10 years old raised a sword with complicated patterns on it. Tears were streaming down her face as she stabbed her elder sister. The girl lying on the ground suddenly laughed and gently said, From today onwards, You'll have to live your own life. Don't be naive anymore. The girl immediately cried until her vision turned into a blur, and the sword in her hand stopped in midair. However, a strong palm pressed the back of her hand, pushing it forward. Oof! The girl was left stunned, as though she couldn't hear or see anything. This was the ancient curse that everyone in the City of Silver was under. They had to kill their own blood relatives to prevent them from turning into terrifying and strange evil spirits after their deaths. Therefore, even though Dark had completely mutated into a monster and was corrupted by an unknown existence, having no value in interrogating, the shadow observer didn't dare to kill him on the spot. Instead, he tried his best to restrain the monster and bring it back to the spire to wait for his parents. Otherwise, the situation would only become worse. The exploratory team members were currently receiving the same treatment that they had been subjected to, a process that remained unchanging for more than 2,000 years. Although no one knew if they would mutate after dying in this state, no one dared to gamble on it. Fortunately, the City of Silver didn't have a large population, and all of them lived in the same area. Under the arrangements of the upper echelons for each generation, there were quite a few people who were related to each other by blood. Even if they were limited by 3 generations, they would still be able to find quite a few. Because of this, the Beyonder in charge of setting up a patrol team would first have to consider the matter of blood ties in order to prevent any unexpected situations from occurring. The requirements for exploratory teams weren't that strict, because their missions were always to invade deep into the darkness and stay far away from the City of Silver. Even if they died or mutated, it wouldn't affect everyone's safety. Once a resident no longer had blood relatives within 3 generations, they would be placed under strict surveillance, and as soon as he became seriously ill or visibly aged, he would be exiled into the depths of darkness, away from the City of Silver. When the previous captain of the exploratory team, Uddle, was isolated in the dungeon, there were actually 3 elders in the spire. However, the one who took action was Chief Colin Iliad in the end. Otherwise, they could only attempt a seal. This was because Uddle was the elder brother of his direct kin. Shepherd Lovia and Demon Hunter Colin silently entered the bottom level of the spire. Accompanied by a few Dawn Paladins, they arrived at the depths of the dungeon. Soon, both of them stopped outside a cell. The Dawn Paladins dispersed themselves a distance away. Without any abnormalities, she walked into a room with a single bed, a table, and a single candle at a moderate pace. Before the metal door closed, she turned around and looked at Demon Hunter Colin with her pale gray eyes. "Your Excellency, you once told me that when residents of the City of Silver leave this place and die in the depths of the darkness, they won't immediately turn into evil spirits. A few days have to pass. Therefore, the other members of the exploratory team have plenty of time to pull open a distance from them." Colin nodded and expressed his agreement. Lovia closed her eyes, revealing a sad smile. "In an exploration 2 months ago, a team member died in front of me. I pretended to be separated from the rest of the team. I waited there for 5 days, but he didn't turn into an evil spirit." Demon Hunter Colin looked at her in silence, not saying anything until the metal door closed with a clang and the seal took shape. In the ancient palace above the fog, after waiting for a while, Klein was finally relieved when he saw that there were no changes to the crimson star which symbolized Little Sun. He should have succeeded. He rubbed his temples, wrapped his spirituality around his body, and descended back to the real world. As soon as he felt the presence of his body, Klein experienced the bitter cold. He sneezed, then he quickly removed the wall of spirituality and crawled back into bed. Sadly, his bed was already ice cold. "Fortunately, my body receives a certain degree of protection after entering the gray fog. Otherwise, I would probably catch a cold tomorrow. Klein wrapped himself tightly with his blanket and sighed. The current state he was in reminded him of a joke he had heard in his previous life. Warmth is basically gained by vibration. Before his bed warmed up again, he could only let his mind wander as he thought about all sorts of matters. Yes, there are no pressing matters for me recently. The magician's rules have been concluded. Even if I don't challenge the impossible and only engage in acting, normally, I should be able to digest the potions around New Year's. My next task is to collect the Beyonder ingredients for the faceless potion and save up the necessary funds. But that's not something I can rush. The taut strings in Klein's mind gradually softened, and he suddenly had the thought of resting for 2 to 3 days. As the bed warmed, he fell asleep without realizing it. When he woke up, he heard the church bells ringing 8 times. Klein stretched out his arm, felt the cold, and silently withdrew it. It seems to have turned colder again today, since there's nothing pertinent to do. It seems I can just continue sleeping in relaxed. He closed his eyes again. But after a while, he heard his stomach growling and felt the bulge in his lower abdomen. Life is full of hard choices, Klein mumbled. After 10 minutes or so of struggling between the two feelings, he finally gave up, got up, and rushed to the bathroom next door. After changing his clothes and washing up, he went down to the first floor and took out some ingredients to cook Potter noodles. This time, he didn't intend to use the meat sauce that he bought, but instead, he wanted to try the meat paste he had made 2 days ago. This was the meat paste he had carefully chosen from the ingredients based on his memories. Although there were ultimately differences in the ingredients between the two worlds, preventing him from fully replicating the authentic taste, Klein still found it pretty good after sampling it. It wasn't long before he had a bowl of Potter noodles with condiments and meat paste. He found it a really wonderful morning. Keeping in with the tradition of this world, he browsed through the newspapers as he ate, and he checked if Eye of Wisdom had placed an advertisement first. Based on his late-night thoughts from yesterday, Klein decided to have some fun today, so he considered whether he should go to a concert, an opera, or a play. The tickets to many of the music halls in the West Borough, Hillston Borough, and Sherwood Borough are at least 6 solely, and if it's a famous musician, then they would even be on the order of pounds. Music halls specially catered to common folk range from 6 to 9 pence. Those that are open to the poor with money to spare in East Borough only need 1 pence. Klein flipped through the relevant materials to select his choice of entertainment for the day. At that moment, he heard the doorbell ring. Ding dong. 402 digging. Who is it? Klein jerked his head up to look at the door. He felt as if he were suffering from an illness. The fear of hearing the doorbell ring was identical to the symptoms he had experienced on Earth, being afraid of his cell phone's ringing. Putting down the newspaper and magazine, he looked at the empty plate which had been cleaned even of its seasonings. Then he stood up, and he walked to the door. Before he got a hold of the handle, he already knew that it was Dr. Aaron outside. "Don't you need to work?" Klein mumbled as he opened the door. "Good morning, Aaron. The fog is gray today," he smiled. Aaron was still wearing his cold expression, but there was an additional sense of anxiety and fear written on his face. He nudged his gold-rimmed spectacles and, without bothering to greet him, bluntly said, "Sherlock, I had another dream. I dreamed of Will Ossipton again." Klein almost froze. "That's not right. The real paper crane is with me above the gray fog, while the one I folded is with the night hawks. You're still able to dream of Will Ossipton with a paper crane which was poorly folded by a nighthawk. That's not scientific. No, that's not mystic." Klein became serious and asked, "The same dream?" "No, it's not that scary this time." Aaron became a little calmer. "I dreamed about the grim cemetery. You know of it, right?" "Yes," Klein answered simply. Back then, he had caught a group of students and a mysticism enthusiast who was a complete beginner, Kapusky, engaging in a spiritual dance outside Grim Cemetery. He later received another copper whistle from the latter which could be used to summon a messenger. Aaron drew a deep breath of cold air and continued, "I dreamed of the woods outside Grim Cemetery. I dreamed of a birch tree which had a layer of bark peeled off its trunk, while Ossipton was sitting underneath that tree, looking at me quietly." "And then?" Klein pressed. Aaron shook his head. "The dream ended there." "What a strange matter. Has Dr. Aaron's dream got nothing to do with the paper crane?" "No, if it wasn't related, then there wouldn't have been a situation where the dream changed after the paper crane was switched. Furthermore, I also performed a divination using the paper crane above the gray fog and obtained the corresponding revelations," Klein said in a measured voice. "This is no longer within my scope of understanding." "What do you want from me, Aaron?" Aaron breathed out warm air that dispersed into white mist. "I want to pay a visit to the area outside Grim Cemetery. I want to do it now while it's still daytime. Can you protect me? I'll pay you £1. Heading over to the place that appeared in the dream now. He probably wouldn't encounter anything too strange during the day. Klein thought for a moment and said, "I can accept this request, but I suggest that you go back to the same cathedral and tell your dream to the bishop you're familiar with." Aaron agreed, then said doubtfully, "Why do you always suggest that I go to the cathedral?" "I know you've explained it before in a very logical way that if mystical powers exist in this world, then the churches which have been leading humanity must be the ones with the strongest mystical powers. And if there are none, then at least we can go to the church to get psychological comfort and corresponding connections. However, why do you suggest that I go to the cathedral for something that isn't considered too strange?" Klein considered for 2 seconds, then replied seriously, "I'm a detective. I've come into contact with a lot of unusual things, so I understand the special nature of the church. I also know when to ask for help." "Really?" Aaron listened with a serious expression. The corners of Klein's mouth curled up. "Just kidding. Take it easy, Aaron. I'm going to change my clothes first. And also do the dishes." Having chatted with Aaron at the door for a long time without his thick coat, he turned rather stiff from the cold winds. Taking this opportunity, Klein went to the washroom, went above the gray fog, and divined the degree of danger for this mission. He received the answer that there was almost no risk. If he received a revelation indicating that it was dangerous, his plan was to reject the mission using the Church of the Evernight Goddess as an excuse. Hillston Borough, Myriad Star Cathedral. "Sherlock, why don't you hire a maid? As a great detective, you can afford to have several servants," Aaron asked, as he led Klein to the Church of the Evernight Goddess's largest cathedral in Hillston Borough. This was something that he had wanted to ask while in the carriage, but he had never found the opportunity to change the subject. Klein sighed and said heavily, "Aaron, let me tell you a story." There was a detective who hired 2 maids, a cook, and an assistant, and he was doing pretty well, but one day he took over a case and successfully homed in on the murderer, who was a very savage and cruel man. He sneaked into the detective's house with the intention of revenge. The detective was a fighting expert, and in the end he was only slightly injured, but 2 of his servants died because of him. "Do you get it, Aaron?" "I see." Aaron's voice had a hint of empathy. "Sherlock, I never knew that you've had such an experience." "No, the main character has nothing to do with me. I just made up a story. It's not like I can tell you directly that I'm involved in many strange and mystical matters, and that there will always be unspeakable secrets in my house, so that it's best I don't hire any servants." Klein looked forward and let out a long sigh. The cleaning of his home was done twice a week, mostly by Mrs. Stellan Sammer's maid. She was responsible for the most basic cleaning procedures, and each cleaning cost 1 solely. While they were talking, the 2 of them had already entered the hall of the Myriad Star Cathedral. It was dark, quiet, and devoid of candles. completely in line with the Church of the Evernight Goddess's style. At the very front of the hall was an altar engraved with a dark sacred emblem. The stars were inlaid with self-illuminating pearls, and the crimson moon was made of rubies. The rest of the hall was filled with the darkness of the night. With a single glance, he could see that the place was filled with specks of light as the crimson light illuminated the area, making the place extremely sacred. But Klein felt that this was inferior to the design used by St. Selena Cathedral in Tingen. That hall was pitch black, with only light penetrating from the front through the fist-sized holes. It resembled a star sky, making one feel awe from the bottom of one's heart. However, there's a problem with that kind of design. At night, the effect would be gone. Klein took a seat at random, took off his half-top hat and leaned on his black hardwood cane, while Aaron continued down the aisle to the confessional in search of the bishop. Sitting in such a large hall and looking at the people who were concentrating on praying, Klein's heart suddenly became tranquil. Come to think of it, this is only my third time entering the goddess's cathedral. He let out a self-deprecating laugh. Inside the Cathedral of Serenity at Winter County, Leonard Mitchell put on his black windbreaker and red gloves and entered the room of the high-ranking deacon, Crestet Sesamir. Congratulations, you have officially become a red glove. May the goddess bless you. Sesamir drew a crimson moon on his chest. He still had his mouth covered with his high collar. Praise the lady. The honor is mine. Leonard raised his right hand and gestured 4 points in a clockwise fashion. Sesamir didn't say anything else and went straight to the point. According to your request, I've placed you in Sost's team. He's a soul assurer and possesses a mystical item. I've already ordered someone to prepare a Beyonder weapon for you that you'll need. Your team will be in charge of a devil summoning case, and you'll take into consideration certain clues to perform the search. For example, cases that have happened consecutively in Backlund and matters related to a tarot ritual. Yes, Reverend Sesamir. Leonard held no objections towards the mission. This will be the beginning of my revenge, he silently said to himself. West Borough, in the periphery of Grimm Cemetery. Klein accompanied Dr. Aaron as they took quite a while to walk around the nearby woods, coughing from time to time as a result of the falling grayish-white dust. Maybe there isn't a tree like that. Dreams can't fully reflect reality. Towards the end of the search, even Aaron was feeling a little uncertain himself. Fortunately, I'm good at finding things, Klein pointed with his cane and said, let's take a look over there and make it our final effort. All right. Aaron gasped for a breath of air. After a short walk, Aaron suddenly stopped and said, while pointing diagonally ahead, over there, over there. About a dozen meters away, a birch tree with a strip of bark around its trunk stripped off stood there quietly, as if it were waiting for them. It's identical to the one in my dream, Aaron said with conviction. Klein smiled and said with some vigilance, but there's no Will Ossipton. Aaron got close to the birch tree, frowned for a while, then he suddenly pointed to the side of the tree and said, back then Will Ossipton was sitting here and he was pointing at the mud below him with his finger, pointing at the mud below him. Klein stood at the side, looking down at the almost unwithered grass. You want to dig it up? Aaron nodded. We've already found this place, so we should confirm what's here. Sherlock, go to the cemetery and borrow 2 shovels. It's better if I stay here. You go to the cemetery, I'm worried something might happen to you, Klein said cautiously. All right. Aaron didn't refuse and he immediately left the forest. After a while, after offering some money, he returned with 3 shovels and a tomb keeper and they began to dig. While Klein was digging, he suddenly smelled something familiar. As the soil on the surface parted, the things below were gradually exposed. It was the body of a child that was already greatly rotten. His skin and flesh looked as if they were about to melt, and many bugs crawled in and out of his nose and mouth. Clang! The shovel fell from Aaron's hand and hit a rock. He pointed to the legs of the corpse, his mouth moving frantically, but he was unable to say a word. Klein endured the nausea and looked closely, discovering that the child's left leg was obviously missing its lower half. At the same time, Aaron took 2 steps back and fell to the ground, shouting sharply, "Will Ossipton! Will Ossipton!" It was Will Ossipton's corpse. 403 The fate of a private detective. He's dead. Will Ossipton is dead, and he seems to have been dead for some time. Could this be fake? Klein looked at the body of the child in surprise and suspicion as many thoughts bubbled in his mind. From what he knew, Will Ossipton was a special child who could be involved with a sequence one of the monster pathway, Snake of Mercury, in some way. In the divination game he played, a casual doctor, "Your luck will get worse," was enough to make Aaron suffer from bad luck for an extended period of time. The paper crane he folded allowed Aaron's astral projection to be located in the spirit world and be instilled with artificial revelations. Even above the gray fog, Klein only received an inkling of his location and couldn't come to an effective conclusion. How could such a child die for no reason? He was dead before Dr. Aaron's dreams. What about his family? Klein narrowed his eyes, and despite his intense nausea, he carefully examined the highly rotten body. He noticed some torn tarot cards in the surrounding soil. His spiritual intuition told him that the corpse in front of him was most likely Will Ossipton. It's really shocking and difficult to understand. I should go above the gray fog later and confirm if it's a fake death from Will Ossipton. Wait, what does this have to do with me? I had already decided not to get involved in this matter any further, in case I get entangled by some snake of Mercury. This might be even more terrifying than sealed artifact 008. Klein snapped out of his daze and said to the terrified tomb keeper and Dr. Aaron, who was on the verge of a mental breakdown, "Call the police." "Okay, okay." The tomb keeper was taken aback at first before he repeated his reply. With the shovel in hand, he turned and ran out of the woods at a speed that was so fast that it appeared as though he was being chased by a zombie. As expected, he's just an ordinary person and isn't cautious at all. In this kind of situation, shouldn't he be wary of the people around him who might have malicious intent? By exposing your back, it would be easy for you to be hit by a shovel. Klein glanced at the back of the tomb keeper and shook his head with a sigh. When he was a nighthawk in Tingen, he had read a lot of case files and found out that many of the victims had ended up becoming victims of their companions. Thinking of this, Klein walked to Dr. Aaron, bent down and stretched out his hand. "There's nothing to be afraid of. He's already dead. It's the death that scares me." Aaron calmed down a bit, and without accepting Klein's help, he got up by himself. His black frock coat was covered with dirt, and Klein felt his heart pain for the clothes for some baffling reason. "I'm the kind of person who can't stand seeing anything valuable get damaged," he inwardly sighed with emotion. Noticing that Aaron was still panicking, Klein laughed and said, "At such times, praying to the deity you believe in has quite a remarkable effect." "Is that so?" Aaron was stunned. He tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise manner and chanted softly, "The Evernight Goddess is nobler than the stars and more eternal than eternity. Your devout believer prays for your blessing." After repeating this over and over again, he gradually calmed down, no longer feeling as terrified as before. Klein drew a triangular sacred emblem on his chest and silently whispered to himself, "God of steam and machinery, your completely unfaithful believer is begging for your blessings." As he spoke, he couldn't help but laugh at himself, suspecting that he might be smote to death by lightning on the spot. However, lightning and thunder belong to the Lord of Storms, and it isn't in the domain of the God of steam and machinery, Klein thought in a relaxed manner. After about 20 minutes, the two of them found themselves sitting in an interrogation room at a nearby police station. During the testimony, Klein frankly informed the police that he was a private investigator who wasn't too sure of what was happening. As for Dr. Aaron, he described his dream in detail as the reason for digging to find the body. Klein could tell that the police didn't believe him at all, but after they had gone out for a while, they immediately changed their attitudes, saying that there was nothing suspicious about Dr. Aaron and Detective Moriarty. All they had to do was sign their statements and leave. Aaron was surprised, but Klein wasn't surprised. It was obvious that the Nighthawks had been involved. The advantage of having the doctor head to the Myriad Star Cathedral in advance was demonstrated. Before leaving the police station, Klein wasn't surprised to see a familiar figure. It was the Nighthawk who had entered his dream earlier. The man on duty, who was probably a captain, was still wearing a gray windbreaker and was obviously more resistant to the cold than Klein. His blue eyes swept past Klein's face without any signs of abnormality, pretending to be an ordinary senior inspector. Klein, who was also pretending to be an ordinary private detective, nudged his glasses, put on half-top hat and left the station with Dr. Aaron in a carriage. After instructing his carriage driver to head to Minsk Street first, Aaron turned to Klein and said, "Sherlock, do you think this will be the end of it? If that body really belongs to Will Ossipton, then you shouldn't be troubled any longer." Klein paused and continued, "Aaron, have you found anything else that's strange during this period of time, regardless of what it is?" Aaron thought about it and shook his head. "No, this is worth celebrating," Klein sighed and said with a smile. To him, this was the best way things could end with Will Ossipton's matter. Although the paper crane Klein had folded above the gray fog wouldn't reveal anything, and there would be no problems with any divination afterward, he was still a little worried that some Nighthawk would suddenly think of something and use it to find some clues. And now, with the death of Will Ossipton, the case might soon reach a dead end, put in the archives, and temporarily declared a closed case. No one would pay any more attention to it without any new developments. Aaron relaxed and asked suspiciously, "Frankly, I don't think my statement was very convincing. Why did the cops choose to believe it in the end?" "I don't know either," Klein feigned puzzlement and said, "I thought I'd have to get my lawyer to take me home again, no, bail me out." Aaron smirked and said, "Sherlock, you seem to have a lot of experience in being sent to the police station." Klein laughed and replied in a deep voice, "It's the fate of every private detective." Just as Klein and Aaron were being taken to the police station near Grimm Cemetery, For's Wall was wearing a long black dress and a black bonnet with a fine mesh hanging down. She entered the silent cemetery and found the grave of Mrs. Ollisa. She and Zio had gone to Empress Borough an hour ago to visit Viscount Glaint, and they had successfully got a verbal agreement for borrowing £400 without any interest. Viscount Glaint's only request was that the two Beyonders accompany him to the gathering Mr. A would convene tonight to ensure his safety. He was anxious to procure a royal jellyfish's venom crystal so that he could complete the concoction of the apothecary potion. Audrey had found the horn of an adult flying unicorn in the family treasury, and she had taken one out in the name of doing a biological experiment, effectively offsetting part of her debt. She also put forward an additional condition for Viscount Glaint to get the help of Duke Negan's children to confirm if the dragon specimens in the treasury had a thousand-faced hunter, and whether there were still light dots flashing inside. When the loan was settled, Fors was in no hurry to pray to Mr. Fool to close the deal as quickly as possible, because it would make Zia intuitively turn suspicious if things developed too quickly. Taking advantage of her free time, she changed her clothes and rented a horse carriage to get to Grimm Cemetery, which was located on the outskirts of West Borough. Knowing the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation and indestructibility, Fors realized that the main ingredient that turned her into an apprentice was the Beyonder characteristic left behind by Mrs. Ollisa. In a way, she had inherited her powers. Therefore, she couldn't help but pay a visit and put a bouquet of flowers in front of Mrs. Ollisa's grave and thank her. It was early winter, and most of the flowers had long since withered, but Force still bought a handful of plain flowers. These flowers were grown in a greenhouse and were quite expensive. "Thank you, Emperor Roselle, for your invention," Force said inwardly in a most sincere manner. As far as she knew, most of the flowers that the nobles used for their winter banquets came from greenhouses, while a tiny portion was delivered directly from the warm south by airships. This was more than the average middle-class worker could bear. Standing in front of the black tombstone, Force took a deep look at the photograph of Mrs. Alyssa before bending down to lay down the flowers and whispered, "Thank you." She immediately straightened up, closed her eyes, and quietly recalled the past. At this moment she heard a slightly aged voice. "You really are a good and kind-hearted lady." Force opened her eyes and turned her head, realizing that Mr. Lawrence from the Abraham family had also appeared there at some point. He was also holding a bouquet of plain but elegant flowers in his hand. "No, this is not goodness, nor is it kindness. Mrs. Alyssa once gave me, a person who had lost her mother, an unforgettable period of warmth," Force said sincerely. Her eyes were suddenly moist. Lawrence, who only had wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, put down the flowers and sighed. "This shows that you value relationships." After chatting for a while, when Force was about to leave, Lawrence, who was waving her goodbye, suddenly began to cough violently. Cough, cough, cough. He coughed until his legs buckled and fell to the ground. It seemed as if he would die at any moment from suffocation. As a doctor who had graduated from an accredited school, Force didn't hesitate to turn around, crouch down, and begin performing first aid. After a while, Lawrence's condition finally stabilized. He wiped the saliva from the corner of his mouth and smiled at Force. "Lady, can you take me back to the hotel?" "No problem." Force helped him to his feet. Lawrence looked ahead, his eyes a little out of focus. He coughed lightly, and he said with a sad and self-deprecating laugh, "My life might be coming to an end. 404 Entrews West Borough, Carlpensa Hotel." Force helped Lawrence into his room and laid him down on the bed. It was a rather luxurious hotel, with thick, soft, grayish-yellow carpets everywhere except the washroom. On the walls hung imitations of famous oil paintings. Lawrence gasped for air and said, "Thank you, Miss Wall, and please forgive a dying man for not being able to bow." "No, Mr. Lawrence, your problem has eased. As a former medical doctor, I can tell you without a doubt that you can still live. After some rest, we'll go to a clinic or a hospital," Force consoled him. Lawrence smiled. "I know my physical condition very well. You don't have to comfort me. Besides, I'm an amateur astrologer. I already had a premonition that I'm going to die in this hotel in Backlund." Aside from some superficial concealment, everything he said was the truth. He was already close to 80, and he was no longer that robust and spirited young man from before. If not for the sequence potions that elevated his constitution, he might have already been buried in some random cemetery. Originally, Lawrence thought he could live for another 10 years, but who would have thought that he would encounter a rebellion caused by the former traveler Bodis? He suffered relatively serious injuries at the hands of the Aurora Order, and his remaining descendants all died in that disaster. This dealt him a great blow, and he almost didn't manage to recover from it. The search for his brothers and their descendants in Backlund had only resulted in him receiving news of their deaths, dealing him a significant blow to his mental well-being once more. Compounded by all these things, Lawrence clearly felt that his life had come to an end. His initial plan was to return to the graves of Lawbero and Alyssa again, and present a bouquet of flowers. He would then return immediately and meet with the other members of the Elder Council to set things in order before his death. But being an elderly man, his condition was beyond his control. Without waiting for a response from Force, Lawrence struggled to retrieve a palm-sized notebook from the inside pocket of his half-open coat. The hard paper cover of the notebook was bronze green, giving off a very ancient feeling. On its surface, the words, "I came, I saw, I record," was written in ancient Fasak. Lawrence placed the notebook on the quilt in front of his chest and took a deep breath. "Miss Wall, if I die here, can you help me send it to Pritz Harbor?" "Mr. Lawrence, you'll be fine," Fors emphasized. At the same time, she subconsciously glanced at the notebook and found that it wasn't thick at all. There were a total of 3 types of papers inside, one of which was a yellow type of parchment which had very few pages. The other was yellowish-brown goatskin, and the number of pages was in the middle of the range. The last was comprised of ordinary white paper and was the most common. Lawrence laughingly said with great difficulty, "I mean, Miss Wall, will you help? Pritz Harbor isn't far. It's not even a trip. If it needs to be rushed, then I can even make the round trip in half a day by taking the steam locomotive." Fors nodded. Lawrence breathed a sigh of relief as his mind seemed to recover a little. "After I die, wait 10 minutes. Retrieve the glowing object from my body, and then send it along with this notebook to Dorian Gray at the Pritz Harbor's Fishermen Association. The £42 in cash in my wallet will be the reward and my gratitude. As for these clothes of mine, let it turn to ash along with me. No, you don't need to give me anything. No, you'll be fine, Mr. Lawrence," Fors said earnestly. As if he hadn't heard her, Lawrence whispered to himself, "Maybe Dorian will give you additional rewards, but it depends on you. I believe you. From Aulus's matter, I can tell that you're a good girl." He suddenly seemed to turn lucid as he said to Fors, "Ms. Wall, can you go down to the first floor and bring me a jug of water? I don't know when the waiter will come over." "No problem." Without thinking, Fors took a water jug and walked out of the room. After walking a few steps, she suddenly felt that something was amiss. The water jug in her hand was heavy, and there was obviously a lot of water in it. Just as she was about to turn around and ask, she suddenly sensed a strong fluctuation of spirituality in the room. That was, for a moment, Fors froze, and then she understood what Mr. Lawrence was trying to do. As death approached, he could clearly sense that something was wrong with his body. He was afraid of losing control and turning into a monster. He wanted to die as a human, not a monster, so he chose to end his own life. That was the last form of decency for a Beyonder. Of course, if he had turned into a monster, all his plans would have come to naught. With this in mind, Fors became dejected. She waited outside for nearly 10 minutes before she pushed open the door and entered. She saw Lawrence lying silently on the bed, looking like he had aged considerably. Beside him was a diamond the size of an eye. The light which shone in through the window was constantly refracted by the diamond, forming a scene as beautiful as the radiance of the stars. Fors sighed and performed a careful examination. She found that the cause of Lawrence's death was the most ordinary form of cardiac arrest. Sherwood Borough, 15 Minsk Street. Klein rested for a while after getting home. He then went above the gray fog, having plans to divine the situation with Will Ossipton. He had the paper crane fly out of the trash pile in the corner and made it land on the long bronze table in front of him. Then, he took out the topaz pendant that was wrapped around his sleeve. As he held the spirit pendulum in his left hand, Klein used cogitation to adjust his condition before recalling the scenes he had seen in the woods outside the cemetery. He might not have noticed some of the details, but it was certain that his spirituality wouldn't miss any. This divination was mainly about using this point and relying on the gray fog to eliminate all distractions. After finishing his preparations, Klein took out a goatskin parchment and wrote the divination statement. Will Ossipton is completely dead. Then, he pressed the paper crane next to the divination sentence, almost causing the topaz pendant to touch the words. After entering a state of cogitation and completing all the steps of the spirit dowsing, Klein opened his eyes and looked at the result. The topaz pendant was rotating counterclockwise at a fast frequency and high amplitude. It was a negative result. That meant that Will Ossipton wasn't completely dead. This, Klein was surprised, but it seemed to be within his expectations. He thought for a moment, then he changed the divination statement. That corpse was Will Ossipton's. This time the spirit pendulum gave a positive result. The body did belong to Will Ossipton. An idea came to Klein's mind and he wrote a new divination statement. Will Ossipton's corpse will resurrect. After a few moments of calmly performing the divination, Klein saw the revelation. The pendulum was rotating counterclockwise with a fast frequency. That meant that Will Ossipton's corpse wouldn't be resurrected, or in other words, no reanimations. It looks like Will Ossipton had voluntarily or was forced to abandon his previous body, and he is surviving in another way. This matter has something to do with the snake of Mercury. Klein tried to divine additional information, but he failed repeatedly, including the statement, Will Ossipton's present state. However, he repeated the divination using dream divination and inquired Will Ossipton's current location. He received a similar scene, a dark room with the sound of running water. However, the feeling it gave him seemed to be a little different. Forget it, there's no need to waste any more time on this. I'm not planning to get involved anyway. Klein put away his spirit pendulum and prepared to return to the real world. Through the prior divination and everything that had happened before, he had a theory about Will Ossipton, but he couldn't confirm it. He suspected that Will Ossipton was another snake of Mercury. As a sequence one, a snake of Mercury wasn't the only one. There could be up to 3 in existence at the same time. The snake of fate, who wielded destiny naturally, could locate Aaron's astral projection through the paper crane and show him a false revelation. Without a doubt, it also had the ability to change a person's fate. For some reason, Will Ossipton had become weak and was under the threat of the second snake of Mercury. Everything he did was to escape his counterpart. As for the reason for their conflict, the answer was simple. Without a sequence 0, there could be 3 sequence 1s at the same time, but once there was a sequence 0, there would be no sequence 1s. Regarding this sentence, the formula of the Dark Emperor potion clearly stated the truth. One of the main ingredients of the recipe was 2 Beyonder characteristics of a Prince of Disorder. Prince of Disorder was sequence 1 of the Dark Emperor pathway. As a sequence 1, if one wanted to advance to sequence 0, then one had to obtain all the Beyonder characteristics of the other 2 sequence 1s of the same pathway. With this guess in mind, Klein was increasingly afraid of getting involved with Will Ossipton's case. If my deduction is correct, it would be a genuine fight between deities, and I can't afford to get myself involved. Klein's spirituality descended, and he disappeared from the ancient palace above the gray fog. In Empress Burrow, in an inconspicuous house, the Beyonder gathering organized by Mr. A proceeded as scheduled. Forz and Zio had changed their clothes, and they accompanied Viscount Glaint, who was wearing an iron-black mask, into the hall. They randomly chose a seat and sat down. Viscount Glaint wrote down his needs to the attendants before the gathering officially began. He also prayed to the goddess that there would be a response later. As usual, Forz maintained her usual languidness, and in a rare instance covered herself with a hood, concealing her face with the shadows. She was thinking about the situation with Mr. Lawrence. She knew very clearly what that diamond, the size of an eye, was. It was a Beyonder characteristic left behind by him. However, for the time being, she was unable to confirm what sequence it belonged to. Forz had casually flipped through the notebook, only to find that many of the pages were still blank. The written content was filled with all sorts of strange, odd, and mysterious symbols and magic labels, exceeding whatever she knew. What it is isn't important. What's important is that I keep my promise, Forz warned herself. At this moment, Mr. A, who was seated on a single sofa and was wearing an exaggerated hood, said hoarsely, "I have a mission. Help me find people who believe in the so-called fool." Ah, Forz instantly snapped back to her senses. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com 405 Cult. The Fool. The Beyonders who attended Mr. A's gathering either ruminated over the phrase or conversed with their companions to discuss whether they had ever met anyone who had a similar faith. When did such a cult appear? Someone asked in a low voice. At this point, Mr. A made the attendant beside him hold up a blackboard with a few lines of words written in the lone language. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. As the attendees examined the blackboard, Mr. A said in a hoarse and jarring voice, "Do not use Hermes to read what's written here, even more so for Jotun, Elvish, Dragonese, and ancient Hermes. You shouldn't even write the corresponding descriptions, otherwise there is a high probability that something terrible will happen. Help me find believers in the fool." Of course, they might also be followers of the mysterious ruler above the gray fog or the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. As long as there's a clue, inform me immediately. The reward I'll provide will be so handsome that it will far exceed your imagination. This description, it sounds like an incredible existence. I've only seen similar descriptions in the ancient texts of the seven gods, a gathering member exclaimed. His companion shook his head and said, "The beings which many cults believe in have similar descriptions." Is it really a cult? The other gathering members were stunned when they heard their discussion. Likely. Typically, when we summon a creature from the spirit world, we might have 3 lines describing it, but one of the lines would be about the blessed one of someone or that who belongs to. It wouldn't be in this format. A gathering member who was well-versed in mysticism gave an explanation. As they vehemently conversed, Forz was nearly dumbfounded. Isn't that the honorific name of Mr. Fool? Even though it's described in the lone language, I'm sure of it. Why would Mr. A want to find the believers of Mr. Fool? Is the Aurora Order behind this? Forz's mind was in a mess. She knew that Mr. A was a member of the Aurora Order because of a particular terrorist organization, had announced its responsibility in the assassination of Inti's ambassador Backerland. After a brief moment of astonishment, Forz subconsciously began to examine herself, afraid that someone would discover that she was already a member of the Tarot Club, and that, in some sense, she was an adorer of the Fool. I just recited the honorific name of the Fool according to the ancient Hermes on that piece of paper and was pulled above the gray fog. No one knows about this, and I don't have to be afraid of being investigated. But there's a link to that piece of paper with Mr. Fool's honorific name written on it. It was hidden in a book we borrowed from the Viscount Glaint. Thoughts rapidly flashed through Forz's mind. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. Isn't that the description I saw on that piece of paper? I even dreamed of an evil spirit. At the same time, Zio remembered the incident that had frightened her, but her long experience as a bounty hunter had kept her from revealing anything unusual. And then, as she recalled, she thought about the origin of the piece of paper. It was hidden in the bookcase of History of the Lone Kingdom's Aristocracy. That book was borrowed from Viscount Glaint's study. Suddenly, a name flashed in both Forz and Zio's minds at the same time. Viscount Glaint. At that moment, Viscount Glaint was looking at the blackboard and said to himself with interest, "This honorific name is very rare, but it sounds very impressive." Just as he finished his sentence, he looked to his side in puzzlement, asking Forz and Zio, "Why are you looking at me like that?" "Nothing." Zio and Forz rapidly shook their heads at the same time. After dinner, in an elegantly decorated house, Audrey brought the huge golden retriever, Susie, into the living room under the guidance of her psychology teacher, Escalante. She was attending the academic meeting that had been agreed upon last week. Her maid and bodyguard stayed behind while she walked with Susie into a spacious activity room. In the activity room, be it for the atmosphere or some other reason, the gas lamps were not lit. The room was lit by gold-plated candle lamps on the coffee table and cupboard. Before Audrey could take a good look at her surroundings, she saw a gentleman in his 30s walking towards her. He wore a gray tailcoat. "This is the owner of this place, Mr. Stephen Hampers, a furniture merchant." The long-haired Escalante introduced him. She was just about to tell him Audrey's identity when Hampers chuckled and said, "Escalante, don't say anything. Let me have a chance at guessing." He had a neatly trimmed mustache and charming dark brown eyes. He appeared very gentle and elegant, nothing like a furniture merchant but more like a university lecturer. After seriously sizing up Audrey a few times, he smiled and said, "Escalante only mentioned that you were her student." "Heh heh, I believe you're a cultured, noble lady and you aren't someone who only looks good. There's no need for you to worry about a decline in the quality of your life. You're a little excited, very curious, and a relatively simple but also full of love, of course. The most obvious point is that you're very beautiful, just like an angel." He made a final joke, pressed his hand to his chest, bowed, and said, "Welcome, the beautiful Miss Angel." "You're right, as expected of a member of the psychology alchemists. However, what you managed to observe was the me from a few months ago. It's all a facade I've put on for myself." Audrey opened her mouth in surprise and astonishment. "Did you know me before, Mr. Hampers?" She didn't let her shocked expression linger too long on her face, because such emotions were meant to be instantaneous and wouldn't last too long. If anyone were to be surprised for several seconds, then it meant that their performance was most likely an act. Audrey didn't notice this at first, but after watching others act all this time, she naturally came up with a lot of rules. "No, I still don't know you. This is just the basics of being a psychology enthusiast." Hampers chuckled. Before he could finish his sentence, Audrey had already completed her observations and made a corresponding judgment based on her surroundings. His attire and the furnishings of his house all indicate that he's a person who cares deeply about how people view him. The sapphire on the ring of his left hand doesn't look small, but its actual quality is very ordinary. There are no symbols or magic labels on it. His finances aren't as good as he presents them to be. He's vain. Even though he was very enthusiastic just now, the way he stands there, the direction in which his feet point, and the changes in his emotional colors all indicate that he still has many concerns and is on his guard. He sincerely commended me on my looks, but it wasn't in the way a man would look at a woman. There are signs of him using facial products, and his eyebrows are definitely drawn. His skills are inferior to my makeup maidservant, Solia, but they're better than mine. The cologne he uses is confusion, something that I've only seen women use before. Yes, he probably likes men, and the role he plays is the weaker one in the relationship. At the same time, Audrey expressed her longing skillfully. "I'd love to have your observational powers, Mr. Hampers." As she spoke, she maintained a faint smile while being introduced to the other 7 or 8 people in the activity room under Hampers's and Escalante's lead. The lovers of both mysticism and psychology were either descendants of fallen aristocrats, associate professors at universities, or the children of the rich. For example, the father of a young man was the owner of Philip's department store, the most famous department store in Backlund. In the exchange that followed, Audrey basically only listened. The only time she spoke was by asking questions, fully expressing her curiosity and yearning. In this academic discussion, Escalante and Hampers deliberately mentioned the body of heart and mind, as well as the spirit world and the collective subconscious. They also shared some relatively unique points of view, allowing Audrey to gradually understand some of the questions she had accumulated all this time. When the discussion ended and they were out of the house, Audrey glanced at Escalante beside her and asked with a little naivety, Ms. Escalante, when will I be as good in psychology as Mr. Hampers? Escalante curled the corners of her lips and slightly tilted her head as she looked at her. Very soon. At night, Klein, who was about to get into bed, once again appeared above the gray fog. Despite being a little sleepy, he was jolted awake by the news Miss Magician had reported. The Aurora Order knows of the fool. They know of my honorific name. The true creator has locked onto me. Klein abruptly sat up straight as though he was about to face an attack. He quickly rejected the final theory. If the true creator had indeed locked onto him, Mr. A would have long visited him on the pretext of collecting a copper penny for the gas meter. Perhaps even a saint might appear. That is to say, only the fool and his corresponding honorific name are known, and the clues point to Backlund. Who leaked the news? Klein frowned as he carefully thought about it. Soon, he discovered a possibility. Little Son has recently chanted my honorific name, and it happened when he was interacting with a member of the exploratory team who was corrupted by the true creator. He held a sacrificial ritual, and there were likely symbols corresponding to the fool at the scene. The ancient palace above the gray fog appeared. So the true creator sensed the existence of the fool and confirmed that I was the one who had been sacrilegious. No harassing, no that's not right either spying on him. Also, Little Son used the all-black eye at that time, which contains the mental corruption of the true creator. Through that, he has confirmed that my adorers and believers are in Backlund. I can't take the all-black eye out in the future. Having roughly understood the problem, Klein was left with another problem. Mr. A announced the bounty for Mr. Fool's believers at a not-so-private, relatively open Beyonder gathering. Is he just dumb, or is he deliberately fishing? The Aurora Order members are all bigoted lunatics. Their brains are mostly damaged, so it's impossible to deduce their real intentions. This is as the saying goes, as long as I'm crazy, you won't be able to guess what I'm thinking. 406, a joyous but extremely helpless reality above the gray fog. The magnificent palace stood silently. Klein drummed his fingers rhythmically on the edge of the long bronze table, concentrating on what he could do in the face of the threat of the Aurora Order and Mr. A while having a hard time figuring out the other party's intentions. He instinctively came up with an idea. Report Mr. A. Report illegal gatherings. Klein could very easily learn of the location where Mr. A held the gathering through Miss Magician, and thus, he would be able to easily report it to the Nighthawks, the mandated Punisher, or the machinery hivemind in secret. An oracle of the Aurora Order was bound to garner enough attention. When that happens, Mr. A's safety would probably be at risk, so he probably wouldn't have the time or effort to track down the believers of the fool. The problem, however, was that this was bound to implicate a group of innocent Beyonders, and Klein suspected that this was the reason why Mr. A directly offered a reward for the believers of the fool. Perhaps he had long planned an escape. Once someone reports him, he would be able to confirm without a doubt that the fool's believers were among the previous gathering members. As for who it was exactly, that wasn't important. Mr. A and the lunatics of the Aurora Order were definitely capable of taking exhaustive measures, and once these Beyonders fell into their hands, many of them would be unable to hide their secrets. The Aurora Order, or the Shepherd Pathway which represented the true creator, are the best at corrupting others. When the ideology of a Beyonder was completely twisted, and once they believed in the true creator wholeheartedly, what else could be kept a secret? It's not like there's no other way. It's best not to report it. Klein leaned back in his chair, collected his thoughts, and reorganized the entire matter. As he was thinking, he suddenly realized a problem. There were no believers or adorers of the fool in this world. Even the Tarot Club only had a few members, and no one had divulged the relevant information. In other words, the Aurora Order wouldn't be able to find any relevant clues. There's nothing to worry about. The only bad outcome is that the Fool is now targeted by the true Creator. Although being targeted by an evil god isn't a pleasant feeling, it basically wouldn't affect anything else. Klein nodded thoughtfully. He had thought it through very clearly. The only flaw in this matter was that he had once used the title of the Fool, written in the language of ancient Hermes, as a password for an anonymous account. However, with the sacrificial and bestowal rituals having proven useful, the account had long been abandoned and had long since been forgotten. Since the last month and a half, no one had been noticed by Klein for copying the password, so it was possible to deduce the actual situation. As such, bank employees who had been in contact with the password but apparently do not understand mysticism wouldn't be able to reveal it to anyone, and Beyonders would at most make requests in the loan language. So even if they find the right person, it's not possible to connect the content described in the loan language with that of the ancient Hermes password. If anyone had copied it down, I would be the first to know and would be able to respond effectively. Besides, even if someone finds the password, it would be difficult to trace it back to Sherlock Moriarty. I use a variety of means every time. Miss Justice is also sufficiently careful when saving money while rapping the table. Klein relaxed and said with a chuckle, "You believe that the Fool has many adorers and believers and that this would result in many clues that cannot be hidden. Wrong, especially wrong. There's only one believer and adorer of the Fool, and that's me." When he said that, he couldn't help but let out a self-deprecating laugh. "It doesn't seem like it's something that I should be proud of. I need to be a little careful for the time being. I shouldn't go around using the banner of the Fool." Klein reminded himself and went back to answering Miss Magician's prayers. He adjusted his posture and said in a low, gentle voice, "Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." When Forbes received the answer, she was surprised but also felt that it was only right. In the eyes of Mr. Fool, the Aurora Order is nothing but a bunch of ants. Forbes once again recited his honorific name in a low voice, and she curiously asked, "Honorable Mr. Fool, which existence does the Aurora Order believe in?" Then she saw Mr. Fool sitting on a high-backed chair in the middle of the gray fog. He leisurely said, "The true Creator." The true Creator. Forbes' eyes widened as she instantly understood why Mr. A suddenly sought out the believers of the Fool. With the help of the Tarot Club, that Sun youth in the City of Silver had successfully exposed the abnormality of the exploratory team and thwarted the true Creator's ploy. Behind this incident is a confrontation and struggle between Mr. Fool and the true Creator. Forbes didn't dare to ask any further, and she quickly recounted her meeting with the members of the Abraham family. She also mentioned Lawrence's will, the strange notebook, and the Beyonder characteristic he had left behind. "Honorable Mr. Fool, what should I do?" she asked for advice with uncertainty. "What should you do? Miss Magician really is lucky. Why haven't I encountered such a good thing?" Klein responded with a chuckle. "Follow the true desires in your heart." He wasn't the least bit worried that Dorian Gray from Pritz Harbor's Fishermen Association would harm Miss Magician, because he knew she had 2 more stones on her bracelet, allowing her to teleport through the spirit world twice. "Follow the true desires in my heart." Forbes lowered her head in thought. "I understand. Thank you, Mr. Fool." She decided to buy a steam locomotive ticket tomorrow. Using this mode of transportation, it would take a little over an hour to get from Backland to Pritz Harbor, or maybe less. After reporting everything, Forbes requested to hold a sacrificial and bestowal ritual. After receiving a positive response, she exchanged £600 in cash for the Sheriff Beyonder characteristic. Holding up the fist-shaped object comprised of black iron, dark red, and silver colors, as well as its beautiful spiritual radiance, Forbes felt joy and admiration. Zio had long gathered the supplementary ingredients, so she would soon be promoted to Sequence 8, and I don't know when I'll become a trick master. I hope Mr. Hanged Man and the others can help me find the appropriate Beyonder ingredients as soon as possible. Zio had been subconsciously acting as an arbiter, so she didn't have to worry about her digestion of the Sequence 9 potion, but once she becomes a sheriff, what should she do? Should I ask permission from Mr. Fool to teach her the acting method? Or should I simply suggest that she sneak into the police force? At the end of the long, mottled table, Klein looked at the thick stack of cash in front of him and carefully counted it several times. Through this method, I would have 1,230 pounds. I would still be short of 300 pounds to obtain a single Sequence 6 Beyonder ingredient. Of course, 1,500 pounds is the minimum price, and the actual transaction price is usually much higher than this. Where else can I get money these days? As soon as the bicycle patent is granted, shall I sell a portion of the shares? Yes, I almost forgot how special the Tarot Club is. The werewolf Beyonder characteristic cannot be sold in Backland for now, so as to avoid being discovered by high-sequence Beyonders from the Rose School of Thought. But I can always sell it elsewhere. I'll let the world entrust Mr. Hanged Man to sell it at the Sonya C at the next gathering. I'll offer a corresponding amount of the commission as his reward. After subtracting the costs, the werewolf Beyonder characteristic should give me at least 1,000 pounds. It will be more than enough for a single Sequence 6 Beyonder ingredient. Klein quickly came up with a plan and decided upon it. He found it a little regrettable that Miss Zio didn't seem to have much money. After she became a sheriff, even if she could quickly digest the potion, it would still take her a long time to buy the interrogator's Beyonder characteristic. And if the Abraham family were to take interest in Miss Magician, his subsequent astrologer potion formula would no longer be marketable. What a pity! Klein sighed and returned to the real world. Wednesday morning. Klein didn't suffer from insomnia due to being targeted by the True Creator and the Aurora Order's pursuit. He slept till daybreak and happily went out to buy a daisy pie for breakfast. There was no doubt that daisy pie required sweet iced tea to match it. As he enjoyed the food and flipped through the newspapers, he discovered the advertisement for the Ernst firm and learned that there would be a Beyonder gathering convened by Eye of Wisdom tomorrow night. This time, I'll be able to request to purchase the relevant Beyonder ingredients, but there's a high chance that it wouldn't be available. Even if there's something, it will be supplementary ingredients like the hair of a deep-sea naga. Klein seriously considered the channels in which he could find the ingredients. He spread out his left hand and counted with his fingers. From the Tarot Club there are the outlets of Little Sun, Mr. Hanged Man, Miss Justice, and the rest. Beyond that, I have Eye of Wisdom's gathering, Miss Bodyguard and Marek, but I shouldn't contact them if possible for the time being. Also, yes, I have Vampire Emlyn White. Didn't he mention that he would write to ask some powerful sanguines? That's what social connections can bring about. Coming to this thought, Klein immediately decided to go to the Harvest Church to wait for Emlyn White. Although it was impossible for the Aurora Order to track him down, it still gave him a sense of urgency, making him want to gather the Beyonder ingredients as soon as possible. When he digested his potion, he would quickly advance to Sequence 6. 10 in the morning, south of the bridge, Rose Street. In his double-breasted frock coat, Klein took off his half-top hat and strolled into the rather small Harvest Church. At first glance, he saw the giant-like Father Otravsky and Emlyn White, who was dressed in brown priest robes. The latter was wiping the candle lamps with a numb look on his face, as though he would rather be dead. What a coincidence! Wait, don't tell me he's here for the entire day. He only returns home at night. Klein casually found a seat and sat down. There were less than 5 devotees in the entire cathedral, Emlyn White also saw him and put down the rag. He walked over and sat beside him. The vampire's expression suddenly became lively. He raised his chin and said with a chuckle, "You came here suddenly because you have something you need my help with, right?" 407. The True Adorer Inside the Harvest Church. Klein tilted his head to glance at Emlyn White. Without ruining the serene atmosphere, he deliberately suppressed his voice and laughed, returning with a question. "Are you short on money?" As soon as the words left his mouth, he felt as if he were asking if Emlyn knew about the multi-level marketing company, Amway. Emlyn was first taken aback before he scoffed. "Don't insult a noble sanguine with money," Klein instantly sneered. Looking at the tall and brawny Father Otravsky in front of him, he said rather casually, "According to what I know, those handmade puppets are not cheap. They can even be called expensive, especially those that are as tall as a human." Emlyn gaped his mouth in an attempt to retort, but he failed to say a word. After a moment of silence, he coughed lightly, feigned indifference, and said, "Tell me, what is it that you want my help with? I'm not a sanguine who likes riddles." Klein didn't look at the vampire next to him. He smiled and said, "I have a friend who is about to advance. He needs to collect the relevant Beyonder ingredients. I wonder if you can help." "Are you doubting the capabilities of a sanguine?" Emlyn White said arrogantly. "Even if I don't have them, I can write and inquire from the nobler excellencies. That's what I want." Klein immediately responded with a deluge of words. "Mutated pituitary gland of a 1,000-faced hunter and 100 ml of its blood. Characteristic of a human-skinned shadow and 5 strands of a deep-sea naga. As long as I can get any of these, I will pay you the corresponding price. The cheaper the price, the more you will be rewarded." He purposefully increased the number of supplementary ingredients to avoid any losses. Upon hearing this description without any stuttering, Emlyn White suddenly felt as if he had fallen into a trap of sophistry. He calmed his emotions and said, "The cost for the Beyonder ingredients is at least £100, while supplementary ingredients are at least £10. Although I'm not clear of the level of the things you want, I believe that they're definitely not cheap or common. Otherwise, you wouldn't have come to me for help." "Very smart," Klein laughed. "Deal." At this moment, Emlyn White had a deep suspicion that he was asking for too little. Therefore, he added, "Mr. Detective, do you have any clues on removing the psychological cues?" Seeing that Father Otravsky was concentrating on his prayers at the altar ahead of them, Klein turned to glance at the vampire and said, "I have the simplest method." "What?" Emlyn White's red eyes lit up. "Defeat Bishop Otravsky and snatch his mental terror candle away," Klein said with a chuckle. "After you meet up with your parents, you should possess the strength needed. Are 3 sanguines not the match of a single Dawn Paladin?" The corners of Emlyn's mouth twitched as his expression collapsed. "We lost. We couldn't beat him. My parents were nearly captured. That mental terror candle is really strange. So you've already tried. The entire family almost converted to become believers of Mother Earth. 3 sanguines weren't even able to defeat Father Otravsky. With the help of the mental terror candle and the blood transfuser, Father Otravsky is that terrifying. Or are vampires too weak? However, all the rumors point towards vampires being rather powerful," Klein said in thought. "Then you can write a letter and ask for the help of the noble excellencies. There shouldn't be a lack of powerful experts among the sanguine." Emlyn White answered with a numb expression. "They refused." Suddenly, he looked at Klein with hope. "Can you defeat Father Otravsky? Or could your friend beat him?" After receiving the sun brooch and the biological poison bottle and digesting most of the potion, I originally thought that I would be able to defeat Father Otravsky in my spirit-body state. However, your description just now made me uncertain. Is the mental terror candle that bizarre? This kind of sealed artifact is obviously great at restraining spirit bodies. Klein rationally shook his head. "No way." He quickly changed the subject. Why would those noble excellencies of the sanguine refuse your request? To them, this should be a simple favor. Emlyn White's face instantly turned ashen. They say that Father Otravsky is an adorer of Mother Earth. They do not wish to enter into direct conflict with him. They are studying means to remove the psychological cue. For example, they are venturing deep into the Sanya Sea, the Fog Sea, and the Berserk Sea, in search of the dragons that have long secluded themselves. He added with a smile even uglier than a weeping face, by the time they figure it out or find a dragon well versed in the psyche domain, I might have already become a devout believer of Mother Earth. I'm beginning to appreciate how precious life is and how joyful a harvest is. An adorer of Mother Earth. Father Otravsky is an adorer of Mother Earth. It's no wonder that he has so many mystical items. From the looks of it, as a powerful pirate, suddenly switching to the Mother Earth wasn't a simple matter. Klein sighed, and then he felt a sense of lingering fear. He had almost agreed to Emlyn White's request to attempt to defeat Father Otravsky. If I lose, then I might even be locked up in the basement and forced into confinement. If I win, I might just offend another deity. No, there's no way of me winning. The adorer of Mother Earth definitely has an appropriate trump card. If it wasn't for Father Otravsky suppressing his split personality, then I probably wouldn't have been able to defeat him. Klein wisely didn't pursue the topic. He once again looked at Father Otravsky and said, "You can try to find an organization called the Psychology Alchemists. Otherwise, you'll have to wait for Miss Justice of our tarot club to become a psychiatrist. By then, you might be reluctant to break away from the faith of Mother Earth," Klein silently added. To him, it was best if Emlyn White also joined the Psychology Alchemists. That way, if Miss Justice encountered any problems in the organization, he could help her with other resources, and Klein wouldn't always have to summon himself, who was the trinity of the fool, an adorer, and a believer. Psychology Alchemists. I've never heard of it. Emlyn shook his head disdainfully. It must be a secret organization that recently appeared. This organization has existed for 100 or 200 years at the very least. Klein denied his statement. For a sanguine with a long lifespan, 100 or 200 years means it recently appeared. Among the noble excellencies, a nap might be as long as a century, Emlyn White said proudly. Without waiting for Klein to speak, he looked ahead, cleared his throat, and said, "Do you know how to contact that organization?" Klein was going to answer that there was a man in the Tingen City's asylum named Dr. Daxter Guderian, who's a member of the Psychology Alchemists, but he stopped those words just before they came out of his mouth. With the true creator targeting me, it's best that I don't get involved with people or matters in Tingen. There's a certain risk of exposure, and once exposed, with the Aurora Order's madness, they would definitely not let Benson and Melissa go. Klein slightly shook his head and said, "I've only heard of this organization. You can write and ask the other sanguine." Emlyn White was disappointed and stopped talking about it. He turned his head to look at Klein and said, "I'm guessing your friend who's about to advance is you." Klein looked forward without a care and replied leisurely, "Congratulations, you got it right." Emlyn White was stunned. This was completely different from what he had expected. Noticing his change, Klein laughed softly. "Mr. White, the most suitable job for you isn't to be an apothecary but to be an actor." Emlyn was stunned at first, but he immediately raised his head arrogantly and said, "I'm a deep, noble sanguine. I don't rely on my looks to make a living." "Do you think I'm praising you for being handsome?" Klein slowly stood up and laughed. "No, I mean you are very talented at comedy." While Emlyn White's expression froze, he squeezed his way out to the aisle and said, "Don't forget what I entrusted you with." Pritz Harbor, White Oak Street. For's Wall took the steam locomotive early in the morning and arrived at the kingdom's largest and most important port. She had also booked tickets for her return trip by boat, which was relatively inexpensive. Taking in the smell of the sea, for saw many of the dockworkers who were in a hurry. In the middle of each season, the port was swarming with temporary workers for relatively decent pay, and many poor people living in Backland's East Borough would head southeast on foot and in groups, traveling a distance of more than 60 kilometers. This was the same thing they did when harvesting hops. The roads are wider than Backland's, and the air quality isn't bad, but it's relatively dirtier. Fors looked around and found the Fishermen Association in an old building. Without much trouble, she met Dorian Gray in an office. The gentleman was of medium build with exaggerated arms. His hair was combed rather neatly, completely unlike most of the members of the association who had hairstyles that looked like bird nests. He should also be an Abraham family member. After explaining the purpose of her visit, Fors passed Lawrence's will, along with the strange notebook and the diamond-like Beyonder characteristic. Dorian received the items with a complicated expression before opening the will first. After reading it carefully, he lifted his head and looked earnestly at Fors with his blue eyes. "Your kindness and honor are praiseworthy. Ms. Wall, I shall always remember the help you provided Alyssa and Lawrence. Can you accept my gratitude? I wish to invite you to lunch." "No problem." Fors was still wondering how to pass the time before her ship sailed. Dorian immediately arranged for her to wait in the next lounge, offering black tea, snacks, newspapers, and magazines. Returning to the office, the gentleman opened a hidden cabinet with some misgivings and took out an item. It was a pure crystal ball shining with a radiant light. 408, a bold assumption. Dorian drew the curtains, cloaking the office with darkness before he sat down. He held the crystal ball in his left hand while touching its top with his right palm. As he stroked the crystal ball back and forth, he kept chanting softly. Gradually, the radiant points of light within the crystal ball began to shine brighter and brighter, becoming more and more obvious, as if the stars in the night sky were casting their reflections. Often used to determine the direction of fate, the stars in the trajectory of one's life surfaced one after another, forming a three-dimensional astrolabe with many revelations from the spirit world that resembled symbols. Dorian Gray finally stopped and studied it. She wasn't lying, that really was the trajectory of the situation. She seems to be able to bring about changes to the Abraham family, optimistic changes. As the light from the crystal ball dimmed, Dorian stood up, having already made up his mind. At lunchtime in the Four-Winged Bird restaurant, in front of Fors lay a filleted fried fish which had rosemary scattered over it. Its skin was crispy, its meat fresh, and it didn't have any fine bones. It was rather tasty, but the only problem was that the cook had an extremely warped sense of aesthetics. He had deliberately kept the eyes of the fish bulging out of its head, and by plating the food, he made the fish look up, as though to express its indignation over its death. Fors pushed the head down, cut off the tail, and covered the upturned eye. At that moment, Dorian Gray began moving his fork and knife as he casually said, "Alyssa really liked mysticism and had done some research in this area. When you were packing her things, did you see any books, notes, or other items?" "There were some notebooks and books," Fors answered frankly. "As a result, I became a mysticism enthusiast, but unfortunately, I couldn't understand some of the content at all. For example, the sights in the spirit world. Not only was it absurd, illogical, and messy, incapable of expressing ideas, even if I forced myself to read it and systematically calm my impatience, it was still difficult to remember its contents. I would forget it once I finished reading it, let alone understand it," Fors added inwardly. Dorian nodded slightly and laughed. "Then you can consult me. I'm also a mysticism enthusiast, quite a proficient one if I may add." "Really? That's great," Fors answered appropriately. Seeing that she was really interested, Dorian immediately diverted the topic to mysticism. Sometimes he would bring up the spirit world, and sometimes he would talk about his cogitation experience. Having been prepared before he even stepped into the restaurant, he had deliberately chosen a secluded and quiet spot. Hence, he didn't need to fear that the customers around them would overhear their conversation. At the end of the lunch, Dorian offered, "I didn't know how to express my gratitude, but now I don't have to worry about it anymore. Heh heh. Although Lawrence had paid you, I don't think that's enough to match your kindness, good-heartedness, and honor. Ms. Wall, you can write to me and ask about any questions you have about mysticism. That's the least I can do to express my gratitude. That's what I wish for." Force didn't refuse. From the exchange just now, she could clearly tell that Dorian Gray possessed rich, systematic mysticism knowledge. He was indeed worthy of being a member of the ancient Abraham family, and this was also considered something she was lacking in. Although she had mastered quite a lot of knowledge about the beyonder world, it all came from a few books and notebooks that didn't go in depth, as well as random information she had heard and experienced from the various gatherings she attended. It wasn't comprehensive or systematic enough, and it just had too many shortcomings. Upon hearing her reply, Dorian raised his cup and smiled. "I hope that one day we will also possess mysterious and extraordinary powers." Northborough in Backland, St. Samuel Cathedral. A group of men wearing black windbreakers and red gloves entered an underground area. The leader was a man in his 40s with soft facial features and long hair. Wearing a pompous top hat, he carried a black cane which was inlaid with gold. He quietly followed the Nighthawk leading the way and entered a rather spacious room. There were many bookshelves in the room, with various dossiers placed on them. A mesmerizing, beautiful woman wearing a black robe with blue eyeshadow and blush was leisurely sitting in a high-backed chair. She didn't get up to greet him. It was the former spirit medium, Dolly. "Soast, all the information you need is over there." Dolly gestured with her chin at the table by the door. The middle-aged man named Soast smiled and said, "Dolly, why were you sent to guard this place? You should be tasked with more important matters." "No, this is what I wanted. I need to settle down and read more information." Dolly chuckled. "This is to ease my future progress. Humans are fragile creatures, and they need a certain amount of time to calm down. No one can always be in peak condition, enjoying the thrill and pleasure without any rest. Your style really has never changed. Unfortunately, you've never given me the chance." Soast burst out laughing. Dolly shook her head seriously and said, "Obviously, you don't understand me. My current hobby has turned even more novel. If you can turn yourself into a rotten corpse or expose your white bones, then I'll definitely be filled with interest in you." She turned to look at the red glove behind Soast. "Leonard, why did you choose to join his team? This fellow is conceited, arrogant, and gutless. He keeps fantasizing that women would take the initiative to crawl into bed, waiting for him. To be honest, perhaps this is the unique trait of a nightmare." When she mentioned nightmare, Dolly visibly paused. Leonard helplessly said, "Ma'am Dolly, this was the arrangement of His Excellency Sesamir." "Is that so? I can see that you agree with my views on Soast," Dolly concluded in a slightly husky voice. Leonard was momentarily at a loss for an explanation. Fortunately, Soul Assurer Soast didn't pay much attention to Dolly's words. Walking over to the table filled with information, he picked up a dossier and flipped through it. Leonard and the others immediately surrounded him, imitating their leader. After the sound of paper flipping went on for some time, Soast casually asked, "What's new in Backland recently? Something you think is worth paying attention to?" Dolly's eyes moved slightly. After thinking for a while, she said, "A few Beyonders who work with us have passed on news that many people are searching for an organization that believes in the Fool, and they have given the corresponding honorific name." After describing the Fool's honorific name in the Lone language, she chuckled. "I seem to be witnessing the birth of an entirely new cult. Of course, it might be the incarnation of an old friend. What do you think, Soast?" Soast considered the matter seriously before saying, No, I've never heard of such an organization. At that moment, Leonard looked up from the dossier he was reading and mused. Could this have something to do with the 2 tarot rituals we're investigating? The Fool is the first card in a deck of tarot cards, the most important major arcana card. Dolly froze for a second, then she nodded thoughtfully. That's an interesting idea, but there's no evidence. It's pure speculation, and it cannot even be considered a deduction, so said, disapproval within his tone. Leonard revealed a faint smile and said, Emperor Roselle once said to make a bold hypothesis and then carefully back it up. Hillston Borough, Kellogg Club. As soon as Klein entered the hall after leaving the Harvest Church, he saw the equestrian teacher, Talem Dumont, sitting in a secluded corner, seemingly pondering over something. Noticing that lunch was still some time away, Klein went over and greeted him with a smile. Good afternoon, Talem. You seem to have encountered another problem. Talem snapped to his senses with a start and hurriedly shook his head. No, nothing. You seem to have done something that you have a guilty conscience about. Klein mumbled, sat down, and laughed. It's a pity Aaron and Mike aren't here. Otherwise we'd be having another pleasant afternoon. Talem smiled in response. They're all busy and have very little free time. Without waiting for Klein to speak, he looked around and said, Sherlock, there's an important figure who is very interested in you after hearing about your deeds. He would like to meet you. Would you be willing? Frankly speaking, this leaves me envious. It's a very rare opportunity. Wait, what deeds did I do? Help Mrs. Mary catch her adulterous husband. Accompany reporter Mike to a brothel. Even in my past few trips to East Borough, I didn't do anything impressive. At the very most, they'd know that I made a contribution to the serial murders, and that I helped Dr. Aaron resolve his nightmare by providing him with counsel. Klein was confused. After 2 seconds, he suddenly understood the reason. The important figure must have asked Talem if he knew of an excellent detective, and he could only think of me. So he offered to embellish descriptions about me that sounded pretty impressive, such as the true person who cracked the case behind the serial murders, the person who noticed that Mrs. Mary's former husband and his mistress had attempted to siphon funds from the Coim Company. I was probably described as being effective and sharp, a great detective who struck swiftly and precisely. This is how you tout each other in business, Klein sighed. He hesitated for a moment and said, I'm sorry, Talem, but as a detective, I have my own principles, and that is to not get involved in matters involving important figures. On the stage of the higher-ups, what might be a sneeze-like friction among them might very well be an unbearable disaster for me. I won't paint a target on my back, so I won't see this important figure. This was actually something Klein had decided upon before he became a detective. He was prone to an investigation once he was involved with high society. Therefore, before he became a faceless, he didn't want to bear such risks. You're very rational, Talem sighed and said. The important figure has anticipated this reaction and believes that such a detective is even more trustworthy, so he wishes for you to take on a commission that wouldn't involve high society. What kind of commission? Klein asked. Talem chuckled and said, the Capim case which you and Mike were talking about last time. The important figure is very interested in the organization that uses tarot cards. He said that there has been more than one such case and wishes for you to find any relevant clues. 409 December what? Getting me to investigate myself again. Klein nearly suspected that this was a deliberate test. An organization that uses tarot cards to represent itself really is interesting, and I think so, but I don't want to sell myself out. Right, Capim's matter is clearly not that simple. He had a total of 4 Beyonders protecting him, so there must be a powerful faction behind him. What's the difference between investigating this case and being involved in high society strife? Well, this isn't something Sherlock Moriarty should know. Klein revealed a thoughtful expression, and while weighing his options, he said, "It's not easy to find a mysterious organization. Besides, it's very dangerous." Talon seemed to have expected his answer and chuckled. "Sherlock, there's no need for you to take risks. The important figure's intention is for you to pay more attention and to gather the relevant information or rumors. Here's £5 in cash, money for your activities. Even if you don't receive any valuable information, the money is yours. And once you gather any useful clues, he'll pay you per lead and reimburse you for your expenses throughout the process." Such good conditions. That important figure has put a lot of his attention on this matter. Does he have connections with the forces behind Capim? Or does he wish to find the mysterious organization that uses tarot cards as a code name to help him? Reimburse. It's been a long time since I've heard someone promise me something like this. Since he's already gone so far by promising me such perks, it would appear very suspicious if a private detective were to refuse the commission. Furthermore, the matter of investigating myself should clearly be left to me. Klein hesitated for a few seconds and said, "All right, I'll do my best." He didn't stand on ceremony, and he accepted the 5 one-pound notes that Talon handed him, intending to provide a vague clue every week or two. Isn't the Aurora Order looking for the Fool? The Fool is obviously part of a tarot card. I hope that important figure will pursue this path all the way and get rid of Mr. A. A thought began to form in Klein's mind. Under St. Samuel Cathedral, Soul Assurer Sost assembled his team together to discuss their subsequent actions. He looked at the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell and asked, half asking and half evaluating, "If I were to relegate this matter to you, how do you plan on investigating the 2 cases related to the tarot ritual?" Leonard lifted his hand to comb his hair, smiled, and said, "First, I would go according to my train of thought from before. I would do a reverse search for the people or organizations seeking the Fool's believers. They might know something. Second, I would reinvestigate the first 2 cases and place all the people involved in a name list, regardless of if they were suspects or not. Then, I'll use the powers of a nightmare to inquire and eliminate them one by one. The devil might be in the details, hidden in the person who's most improbable." Sost let out a chuckle. "I've read through the dossiers. These 2 cases involve a lot of people, each living in different places. Wanting to re-examine them is quite difficult, and some of them are already beyonders who are secretly active beneath the surface. They know how to hide themselves very well, and we have no way of knowing where they are. If we were to perform an investigation according to your idea, then what we need wouldn't be a small team. The church would have to inject at least 5 more sequence 7 or above Nighthawks and the corresponding support personnel. The case we are in charge of is focused on the devil summoning case," another red glove reminded Leonard. Leonard didn't seem angry as he let out a soft laugh. "I know. I'm only providing my point of view. As for whether or not it is used, or the extent to which it will be decided by Captain Sost." He paused for a moment and revealed a puzzled expression. "I don't understand why the 2 cases related to the tarot rituals didn't have a high priority. The former involved an evil god's attempted descent, countless times more serious than a mere devil summoning." Sost picked up his coffee and took a sip before leisurely answering, "The Nighthawks have limited manpower. All cases require a certain priority level. Up to now, the secret organization represented by tarot cards hasn't expressed any obvious malice towards us. Their actions, to a certain extent, have helped us. For example, they foiled the descent of the true creator, as well as letting us know that the human trafficker Capim isn't a simple person. There must be some big secret underlying the matter." After saying that, he smiled and said, "Perhaps they can help us discover even more unsavory matters. Of course, the necessary investigations must be carried out. No one can guarantee that a secret organization will not end up being our enemy in the future. I see, Captain Soast. Let's focus on the devil summoning case, Leonard said earnestly. In a backland winter that was inseparable from fireplaces and fog, time flew by amidst these cold and gray sensations. In the blink of an eye, there was only half a month left until the new year. Klein extinguished the charcoal in the fireplace and put on a double-breasted frock coat over his dark red woolen vest. Nearly 3 weeks ago, Leopard finally received the bike patent and began looking for suitable second-round investors. Steam power mogul, Frommy's Cage, ended up showing some interest in this. After several meetings, the three parties agreed to conclude their final negotiations today. During the past month or so, Klein led an uneventful life. Through his investigations, he slowly digested the potion by strictly following the principles. Now, he was just short of a relatively bigger performance that he needed to initiate to completely digest it. If there are no urgent matters, I can avoid taking risks. It would take about another. As his mind wandered, Klein removed the half-top hat from the coat rack and smoothed the folds with a brush and handkerchief, removing the dust. The badge left behind by Lanevis indicated a 4th January gathering. He had no strong intentions on attending it. During this time, the Tarot Club continued being held on a weekly basis. Klein obtained a few pages of Roselle's early diary entries, allowing him to witness how he went from a weakling, who only knew how to dream without taking actual action, to becoming a playboy who actively hunted. Apart from this, he gained almost nothing. Although the werewolf Beyonder characteristic was handed over to the Hanged Man for sale via the world, a sale involving more than £1,000 was obviously not easy to close. The werewolf's unique trait of being cursed also caused many interested parties to shrink back from it. However, a few days ago at a tarot gathering, the Hanged Man told the world that he had contacted an artisan from the Church of the God of Steam, and the other party was clearly interested. Let's hope the deal will be closed this week. There are still no clues to the wind-blessed formula which Mr. Hanged Man wants. Klein packed his personal belongings, picked up his cane, wore his hat, and walked out the door. The wind-blessed potion formula was a sequence 6 formula. It wasn't that easy to encounter one. The Hanged Man, Alger, had waited for more than a month without receiving any good news. Justice Audrey, after undergoing a long period of observation and testing, was finally accepted by the psychology alchemists. She reported to Mr. Fool that she should be officially joining the secret organization this week, hoping to be blessed ahead of time to prevent any accidents from happening. For this, she was prepared to plunder at least 10 pages of Roselle's diary entries from the psychology alchemists for Mr. Fool without any compensation. As for the dragon specimen in Duke Negan's treasury, she had already confirmed that it was a 1,000-faced hunter. However, it was purely a sample that was without the corresponding Beyonder characteristic or flowing blood. The £2,000 she owed Mr. Fool's adorer wouldn't be repaid until February or March of next year. This was because, although she would officially come of age at the New Year's ball and be able to take charge of a portion of her fortune, she would still be under the supervision of her parents and wouldn't be able to sell them at will. Furthermore, she was still short of Viscount Glaint's final payment, so she needed ample time to raise the money in secret. The magician Fours, with the help of the Hanged Man, finally obtained the blood of a deep-sea marlin. She paid him £320 for it, which reduced her savings to £120. In order to make up for her loss and for the stomach pouch of a spirit eater, she began to furiously rush to write her new book, which quickly took shape. It told a story about adventure, love, traveling, storms, pirates, and many other elements fused into a whole. Her and Dorian Gray's correspondence never stopped, and the other party had recently announced that they would be coming to Backland to pay their respects to Alyssa, Lawbero, and Lawrence. The son Derek, who was acting normally as suggested by the hanged man, continued his daily patrols, amassed merit points, and didn't attempt any rituals. At every tarot gathering, he would skillfully pretend to be asleep, and he didn't reveal any problems for the time being. Usually, he would occasionally take a nap to prevent any irregularities from being detected which would put him under suspicion. According to him, Shepherd Elder Lovia didn't leave the bottom of the spire 7 days later and was still locked in there for unknown reasons. With the Aurora orders Mr. A searching for the followers and adorers of the Fool, they failed to receive any valuable clues with Klein's deliberate attempt to keep a low profile. And the Beyonders, who knew the honorific name of the Fool, all understood that they should never chant such words carelessly, unless they were in dire straits, and they definitely didn't have the courage to pray to an existence that was suspected of being an evil god. Emlyn mentioned the last time that he had some clues for the corresponding ingredients, and that he might be able to confirm it soon, but the problem is that I'm lacking the money now. With a silent grunt, Klein took his cane and walked to Lawyer Jurgen's door. When the doorbell rang, he took the initiative and instinctively took 2 steps back. Not long after, the door opened, and old Mrs. Doris cheerfully opened her arms to give Klein a warm hug. "Oh, the doctor you introduced last time was wonderful. My body hasn't been this healthy for almost 10 years. Doris, seeing that the detective was standing far away, could only fold her arms and express her delight and feelings in words. Klein said in an amused and exasperated tone, "Mrs. Doris, you've already told me this for the 9th time." He saw Brody, the black cat, sitting on top of the coat rack. Although it looked precarious, he was able to maintain his balance. "I can do that as well," Klein made a self-evaluation. "Is that so?" old Mrs. Doris asked, perplexed. She immediately tossed the question to the back of her mind and said with a smile, "Are you here for Jurgen?" Klein immediately revealed a smile. "Yes. Matters involving negotiations needed the help of a professional lawyer. 410 Frommy's Cage St. George Borough, 3rd Street. As soon as Klein and Jurgen alighted from the carriage, they saw a massive object parked in front of Inventor Leopard's door. It was iron-black in color, with a dozen wheels in 3 groups, the top of which towered like a ship's chimney, and smoke was emitted from it. It was a steam engine that Klein had seen in magazines and on the streets, often described by the public as an ironclad warship with a rather exaggerated body. If the streets that hadn't been built or rebuilt in the last 20 or 30 years, then it would have filled the roads and left no room for horse carriages. Therefore, transportation vehicles such as this could only be seen in certain areas and places. At this moment, the heavy glass window and door of the car opened, and 2 figures stepped out. One of them was the steam power mogul, Frommy's Cage, whom Klein had met before. A quarter of his blood was of the Fasak Empire, and he had pale blue eyes and a tall but bulging build. He had a pipe in his mouth. The person beside him was wearing a heavy black coat with a gray scarf wrapped around his neck. His features were unremarkable. He looked common with his black hair and brown eyes, yet he exuded an inexplicable sense of familiarity. "Hi, Detective Moriarty, you're really punctual. This is my lawyer and partner, Pashiko Duane." While they conversed, 2 burly men got out of the steam-powered vehicle. They were obviously Frommy's bodyguards. How unprofessional. Shouldn't they come down first and then open the door for their boss? Klein grunted, smiled in greeting, and introduced his lawyer, Jurgen. While he was waiting for Leopard to open the door, he casually chatted with him. "Mr. Cage, is this kind of steam-powered vehicle popular? Do a lot of people like it?" Frommy's Cage laughed. "Those who think that they're decent say that it's too barbaric and crude and ordinary people can't afford it. Only I, an enthusiast of such machinery and steam, would be willing to buy it. It's mainly because many streets are too narrow, Klein said in consolation. Frommy's cage was the investor he found, and he had little to do with Leopard. When he was playing cards at the Kellogg Club, he had deliberately mentioned it, and the equestrian teacher, Talum, immediately mentioned that Frommy's liked similar inventions, offering to introduce them to each other. This made Klein sigh with emotion. The club really was a great place to develop connections, and the members who joined it were never really interested in the free food, drinks, and activity venues. Haha, this is indeed one of the reasons. As the population increases and the cities grow larger, the horse carriage will definitely be eliminated. It's just too slow. What this world is pursuing now is efficiency, Frommy said confidently. He then revealed a smile. Also, I've already obtained an order from the military. They want me to make some improvements, just like it was mentioned in Roselle's manuscript. Increase the armor's bulletproof plating, cover the track so that it can drive on a simple road. In addition, add a thick cannon barrel and then this will be a brand new weapon. Roselle's manuscript, Klein sighed silently, and for a moment he didn't know what to say until, finally, Leopard opened the door. In the discussion that followed, the main people talking were Jurgen and Pacheco. The two lawyers would argue with each other and discuss the terms with their employers, while the completely unprepared inventor Leopard sat there in a daze. Only when asked would he give his opinion. Finally, the three parties agreed that Frommy's would invest £1,000 to take 20% of the shares, and the shares of Klein and Leopard would fall by an equal ratio, 28% and 52%. At the same time, Frommy's agreed to buy a further 18% of Klein's shares at a premium, and this cost him £1,000 after taxes. Similarly, he would buy a 9% stake in the company at a post-tax price for £500. As a result of this deal, Frommy's became the largest shareholder in the newly established Backlund Bike Company, with a 47% share. He became responsible for the subsequent industrialization and marketing, while the company would be funded with the £1,000 he invested as the initial capital. Leopard was the second largest shareholder, with 43% of the shares. His job was to help in the setting up of the assembly line for mass production. Mr. Klein, who only had the remaining 10% of the shares, became a purely financial investor. And the £1,000 he earned from selling his shares had sent his personal wealth skyrocketing to £2,235, almost enough for him to buy a main ingredient for a faceless potion. As a private detective, he still continued accepting commissions in the past month or so his daily expenses didn't drain his savings. I still have to pay £50 to lawyer Jurgen, leaving me with £2,185. I'll have to thank Talum when I see him, a thought flashed through Klein's mind. He signed and stamped the contract. Then he stood up and shook hands with Frommy's and Leopard. I hope for a pleasant partnership. Frommy's took out his golden pocket watch and looked at it before chuckling. Normally, we should have lunch together to celebrate the closing of a deal, but there's an important person waiting for me. I'm really sorry, but there will still be a lot of opportunities in the future. An important figure, another one. The one behind Talum. The one that I claimed reimbursement from using fake information that points to the Aurora order. Klein suddenly felt a little guilty. He hurriedly smiled and said that he didn't mind. After exiting the house and getting into a carriage, Jurgen suddenly frowned slightly. Sherlock, you agreed too readily. Why do you say that? Klein asked curiously. He didn't even know what Jurgen was talking about. Jurgen said rather seriously, when we were talking about the transfer of shares. Based on your description and on Frommy's performance, I can imagine a bright market prospect for bikes. Although it's just an invention at the moment, deflating the overall valuation, You should have kept more shares even though £5,000 is a good price. That way you can get better returns in the future. I thought you were only going to sell 8% and have the confidence to haggle for £500, but you actually agreed to 18%. Even if it were only £500, you would have made a severalfold return on the investment. You shouldn't have been in such a hurry. Because I'm in need of money, however, I did agree very readily without any hesitation. It was a huge transaction, so that does seem rather abnormal for me. As Klein thought back to the scene from before, he began to have some doubts deep down. Was I unconsciously influenced by Frommy's or that lawyer Pacheco? One of them is a Beyonder. Fortunately, the price was fairly reasonable. As he pondered over the matter, Klein said to Jurgen, who was waiting for an answer, "The new year is coming soon." He had no idea how to explain it, so he randomly chose an opening. If the other party was a smart person, then they would go along with the opening and perfect the explanation with their own reasoning. There was no need for Klein to describe it any further. Of course, this was a move aimed at smart people. Ordinary people would end up pressing. So, or what exactly happened? Lawyer Jurgen was obviously a smart man. Noticing Klein's brief silence, he nodded and said, "I understand. What do you understand? I haven't even thought of what to say." Klein pointed to the steam metro station in front of them and said, "I'm getting off here. I need to meet an informant." As the steam-powered vehicle roared forward, Frommy's, who was sitting in the front row, wound down the window and blew out a ring of smoke. He said to the inconspicuous lawyer Pacheco, "Did you use your powers just now?" "It was passively triggered," Pacheco said with a smile. "My powers aren't suitable for such situations. I prefer to face government or enterprise employees." Frommy's nodded slightly. "I just wanted to remind you. There's no need to use your powers in such situations. Do not let this affect what matters most." "I understand," Pacheco replied in a low voice. East Borough, in a cheap coffee shop. When Klein arrived, old Kohler was already waiting for him. He removed his scarf, took off his hat, sat down across him, fished out a stack of one-solely notes and handed it to him. "For next week's expenses and a bonus for the information you provided me the last time. That's a total of £1. He was recently very generous with giving bonuses since he had already found a person to claim them from. Old Kohler, whose face was clearly ruddier than before, received the cash, feeling a little embarrassed. "The information I gave you previously didn't seem to be that important." "No, the importance depends on who wields it. There are a lot of things that you might find trivial, but it's how other people earn their money," Klein explained with a laugh. "What happened this week?" Old Kohler took the stack of bills and stuffed it into his pocket. He said thoughtfully, "Just like before, many people are still looking for the believers of the fool. Haha, how could anyone believe in the fool? That isn't a good name." The corners of Klein's mouth slightly twitched. "Are they making progress?" "The Aurora order is really persistent," Klein thought helplessly. "No, there's no such person." Old Kohler shook his head and then said, "There are a few people organizing strikes recently. They came to me a few times claiming that they will be fighting for reasonable working hours and salaries. It's a very normal thing in this era, but it can lead to quite serious consequences." Klein thoughtfully said, "Pay attention to the organizers of this matter, but don't be too anxious. Safety first." "All right." Old Kohler cleared his throat and said, "There have been a lot of gangsters and bounty hunters looking for a person these days. I don't know why, but I believe someone has offered a bounty." "Who are they looking for?" Feeling the cold, Klein took a sip of his coffee. The warm liquid ran down his esophagus and warmed his belly. Old Kohler thought for a moment and said, "A man named Isaac Eggers." "Isaac Eggers, Isaac Eggers." Klein looked up from his coffee cup and stared straight at old Kohler, who was sitting across him. "Isn't that Mr. Isaac's full name? Why would someone suddenly offer a bounty for him? In C. Zangwill. Relying on his clown powers, Klein feigned indifference as he asked, "Did it say what kind of person he was?" Old Kohler recalled and said, "He seems to be of Balaam lineage and was once a university lecturer."